Right, today guys we're going to be doing a 1UZ non-VVTi engine harness for Link engine management ECUs. This one is actually going to be a base harness that's designed for either a Link, Storm or an X-Treme ECU. So let's get into it. Right, so as discussed, this is going to be a harness for a 1UZ non-VVTi. It is going to be designed either for a Link X-Treme or a Storm. In this case, we are using an X-Treme G4X ECU. Obviously, it's completely brand new built. This one is for a right-hand drive vehicle and using a manual gearbox in this particular case. So obviously today we're going to be doing a couple of things. First, we're going to go through the layout of the harness to show you all the modular sections, how they work. Then we're going to go through the actual fuse box connections that you need to connect on your side. And then lastly, we'll do the actual testing of the harness itself, which includes running of the engine. But first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the pictures up now of what it takes and what it looks like, this entire harness and the build process, so you can see exactly what goes into it. So let's do that now. Right, so now you've seen exactly what it looks like underneath there. What we'll do now is we're going to move into the layout of the harness, and first of all we're going to start here at the ECU end and we'll work our way along there. So looking at the ECU side, obviously really nice and simple. You just have your two connectors going into the ECU, really straightforward, both keyed so you can't get them into the wrong plug. Coming out here, we've then got our plug to our fuse box over there, and that supplies all the powers and everything for the engine harness itself. Then we have this plug which comes out over here as well, and again that is powers for the ECU as well as any items that the ECU is controlling inside the fuse box over there. Right, then we have all of our little sub harnesses here at the beginning. So these are mainly made up of items that are either unused and there for future use. So you'll see we have our 4-pin plug, which is called the digital, so some digital inputs that are unused on there. We then have a 3-pin plug called auxiliary. So these are some auxiliary wires that are not used depending on the situation, which we'll go through later. Then we've got our analog 6-pin plugs. This will have 4 analog inputs available here, and it'll also include a 5-volt and a sensor ground. We've then got our pedal. So as with all of these harnesses over here, now as I understand, as you're aware, the Storm doesn't have drive-by-wire, but we've made the base harness to work for both. So in this particular case, we do have everything ready to use an accelerator pedal if you use drive-by-wire. But obviously that means there's 2 analog inputs here and a 5-volt and a sensor ground, so they can be used in conjunction with the other one to add some sensors in the event that you're not using any drive-by-wire and you do want to use those there. Lastly, which you can see is plugged into our Haltech dual wideband controller, and that is your CAN plug. Okay, so that is really, again, straightforward. It's got 12 volts ground, CAN high and CAN low. And in this case, the customer has opted to use the Haltech dual wideband controller. So that's where he's going to plug that in, and then he's got plenty of length on there to put the 2 Lambda sensors in the exhaust there. Right. So that's that. Then you're going to move along here. You've got your grommet that goes into your firewall. Then you move along there, and then we've got our molded T-piece boot, where obviously the harness is now going to split going that way and that way. So in this case, what I'm going to do first of all is we're going to come along this way over here. So again, it's a nice long straight section that can be tucked away nice and neatly down underneath there. Carries on along there, breaks out over here to go to the front cam sensor. So just bearing in mind, there are 2 cam sensors, but with the aftermarket ECU, we're only using the 1 cam sensor in this particular case, and that's the one at the front over here. The harness then comes down along here, and you have a little mounting point usually on your bracket there to keep it in place, and it's going to split up just behind here. Now obviously the customer's using Audi coils, so this particular coil here would no longer be here. It could be removed altogether, as well as obviously all the distributor and etc. inside this section over here. Anyway, down here it's splitting into 2 sections. So the first section is going to be our oil. Now again, this oil plug is designed for an oil pressure sensor, an oil temp sensor, and an oil pressure switch. In this case, the customer is just opting for the oil pressure switch. So you see we've just got a singular wire out there, which is then plugging into the standard oil pressure switch over there. The other section that breaks out is going to go through that hole down there, down through there, pop out over here, and that's going to go to your crank sensor over there. All right, so that's straightforward plug in there, no dramas. All right. Right, so that's that entire section. So it's really nice and minimal with these modular harnesses in that particular setup. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go and start making our way out over here. Now, nice and easy, we've got our ground, which is the only ground in the harness, and you can bolt it to the M8 hole over there. So that'll go bolting straight in there. We've then got our ignition for the left bank. So what we've done is we've put these on a modular harness. So you could use Audi coils, you could use Denso coils, you could use R35 coils. It doesn't really matter. You can basically unplug this, phone us up, and we'll supply you whatever coil harness that you need to fit your particular application. And obviously in this case, it is going to be the Audi coils. Also make servicing nice because they're able to unplug each individual coil. You can just unplug that section. You can pull all the coils out, lay them on the bench, change all your spark plugs, pop them all back in again, just plug this one plug back in, and then away you go. All right, next up we've got our sub harness. So that's the one that's going underneath the intake. If you wait till the end, you'll see all the photos of the intake harness, as well as obviously the harness that goes through this section, how they're all laid out. So do hang around for that, and you can see how that's installed. But basically this one is designed to run either the standard single wire knock sensors or narrowband knock sensors that come with the engine, or your Bosch dual wideband sensor. So if the customer wants to upgrade and do a turbocharged application, obviously they can phone us up and we'll swap these out from the standard narrowband knock sensors to Bosch wideband knock sensors, and we'll supply the knock sensors with the studs and the nuts as well for you guys. Right, next up we've got our throttle plug. So that's a nice big 12-pin plug over there. So in this particular application, the customer is just using everything as standard. The reason we've got a 12-pin plug is because we pretty much put everything in there to run a complete drive-by-wire system. So that obviously is why everything is in there like that. So in this case, we're just running our TPS, which is just over there, and we're running our idle speed control valve, which is just over there, and that harness is running in the middle of the intake, splitting off there to go to the TPS and coming out the front here, as you can see there, to go to the idle control valve. So obviously we're not using the full utilization of that plug, but everything is already pre-wired for the customer. So if he wants to upgrade, really simple process, just let us know what's going on and we'll make him another sub harness for that. Next up, we've got our injector. So remember, these are all labeled, so obviously you can't get them mixed up. And these are all of the injector wires. So again, they coming in through the middle of the harness, popping out underneath here and going to all of your injectors. And again, same with like the VVTi and all the other modular ones, multiple reasons. Number one, if you want to change injectors, you just change the sub harness. You don't have to change the entire rest of the harness. Number two, when it comes to remove the intake, you can just unplug it at the back here. And that applies for this as well, because obviously it's plugged into your idle speed control and your TPS. So you can just undo the bolts and then pull the whole thing off just by removing these two plugs, and the rest of the harness can stay completely intact and in place. All right, so that's everything popping out of the molded boot over there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shoot over to the other side, and then we'll start going at the next breakout point over there. Right, so the harness is going to run along here, and then you see you've got a couple of mounting points there for some P-clamps if you'd like, and then we've got another breakout section over here. So first of all, we got our MAF sensor. So this is obviously designed to put the MAF sensor on the firewall. That's obviously so you don't get any vibrations from the engine, which could upset the MAF sensor there, so this keeps it out of the way. Then next up, we've got our fuel sub harness. So again, the customer hasn't opted for that, but we have actually put all the wiring in for a fuel pressure and a temp sensor. Now this is where it becomes important, because as you know, on a Link Storm, we don't have analog temp 4. So in that particular case, only oil temp could be done and not fuel temp if you're using a Storm ECU rather than an X-Treme. So these are some of the limitations you are going to come across depending on what ECU go when you run with this particular base harness. But that's obviously easily identifiable, and we'll send you all the documentation with the harness so that you know exactly what's going on. Next up, we've got our ignition for the right bank. So again, exactly the same as the other one. It's going to all the 4 coils underneath there. Obviously, I've got the air box on, so you can't see it, but they're the same Audi coils. Again, exact same principle. You can change out this coil harness whenever you want. You can change Denso, Audi, R35, etc. And also when you're servicing, you can then again just undo this plug over here and pop all your coils out. Now, another reason that's useful for most of the guys that do know, all of these sort of standard connectors, they have very low lives in terms of connects and disconnects, whereas these DTM have much higher lives in terms of connects and disconnects. So it's much better to disconnect this and then pull all the coils out, and then you save your connectors and obviously having to unclip them the whole time. And same applies for the injectors. It's the exact same thing. The less you can unplug these, the longer they're going to last. So that's fantastic. Right, so those are the other three sections there. Then the harness is going to again make its way down there. You can tuck it away in the bottom over there, and it's going to come out here at the front. This is where it's going to break off to the coolant temp sensor, which lives over there. Okay, obviously it's nice and easy to see because I haven't got all of the stuff over the sort of the spark plug leads and everything over there, so it's nice and easy to see that. But there's your coolant temp sensor for your ECU. We then include, like most of our harnesses standard, we do run a wire in here for a single wire temp sensor. We don't populate on these particular aftermarket harnesses because obviously it's going to be more ideal to probably fit the sensor that actually works for your gauges in that location over there where that sensor is, and then you can use this wire and then it'll pop out over there on the other side. Okay. Right, so then we're coming down here and then we go out to our IAT sensor, again all nicely labeled, and in this case we're supplying the customer with a Bosch fast response sensor with a Link aluminium mounting boss. Some of the guys I've seen, they actually mount it in over there, so you can obviously grind this away, weld that onto there because it's got a nice curve to it, weld that onto there, and you can have the intake air temperature sensor right there, or you can have it in your intake pipe over there, so we give you plenty of length to play around with those. And then the last section that's going to pop down over here is going to make its way down, and that's going to be to your alternator sub harness. So again, we put this on a sub harness because there are at least two different variations of 1UZ non-VVTi alternators, so that helps with that. And then again, same as anything else, you could fit the higher rated 3UZ alternators on here with the 4-pin plug for the much later generation like the GS430 or the LS430, and again you can phone us up and then we can make you a harness to control those particular alternators over there. All right, and in this case you can see I do have the wide bands in there, but obviously that's completely separate. In the case of the customer, these would obviously be moved further down the exhaust. You usually want to be about 24 inches from the last cylinder when you are mounting those. Again, that is also not an ideal way to mount a wideband sensor. All right, so I don't recommend mounting them in the standard location because they do not particularly like that. They're much more to be just slightly off of vertical and about 24 inches from the back, so they're not too hot. All right. Okay, so in this case, I've just got them in just so we can actually test that they're working. All right, so as I was saying with the fuel, also some of the digital inputs and some of the auxiliaries, they're basically going to be defunct if you have a storm. And in actual fact, these three auxiliaries over here, what we've actually done is, because they normally use a 6-wire stepper motor, 3 of these wires, what we've done is we've actually spliced over here and taken out to here. So this auxiliary plug is actually only available if you are using the drive-by-wire. But again, we just put it out there so that if you do switch to drive-by-wire, you do have some auxiliaries that are available for you to use. But again, all of this information does come in the welcome packs with these harness, so you guys know exactly what is going on in that regard. Okay. Right, so now we've gone through the complete layout. What I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to nip off, I'm going to print out the welcome pack so then we can start going through what is actually in that 9-pin client plug, and I'll actually go into more detail as to what exactly is in these auxiliary plugs over here. So bear with me a second while I do that and I'll be back. Right, so we're back again now, and now we're going to go through the actual plugs, what is connected over here. The 9-pin plug in the fuse box, which is the one you're going to put into your vehicle, and we're going to go through these 5 auxiliary plugs over here and go through exactly what's in there. Now, with your welcome pack that you will receive with the base harness, you're obviously going to get both pinouts because it'll work for both ECUs. So we've got the X-Treme over there and we've got the Storm over there. Reason I include both is depending on which ECU you end up going with or changing to, you can see exactly what will be connected and what's not connected in the Storm that is connected in the X-Treme. We've then got the section showing you the actual plugs themselves, what they are, what the colors are in the case of the client plug, what it is named and how it is connected. And these are all the other auxiliary plugs which we'll go through as well now. Right, so to start off with, we're going to go to the 9-pin plug. So this is the one you're going to connect into your vehicle. It's got all the important stuff to get everything running. So Number one is going to be a red and it's a 14 gauge, and that's your permanent 12 volt supply, so you can run that straight to the battery. All right, next up is going to be number two, and that is our black with a yellow tracer. Now that is your start signal. Now do bearing in mind with all these harnesses, the starter relay is controlled via the ECU. So this just requires either a 12 volts or a ground. I've set it up for 12 volts because most of the time you guys are using a key barrel. In that case, it's going to give a 12 volt supply. It is fused inside the fuse box, so obviously if anything goes wrong, it won't create any damage to the ECU itself. But that's nice and simple. In this case, you're just going to momentarily touch that on there and the ECU will take over and then it'll start there. I do have a video on the starter relay control, so I'll put a link into that in the top there for you. Right, number three is your yellow with a green tracer. Now that is for your gauge temperature. So again, that relates to this wire over here that I spoke about earlier. So that is something optional. You can connect that if you want, or if you're going to use a CAN dash or something like that, obviously you wouldn't need to connect that, but it is there if you do want to use it. Right, number four is going to be your gray. It's a 16 gauge wire. This controls your fuel pump, and the fuel pump is controlled via the ECU, and there is a relay in here for the fuel pump. All right, so you can take that directly to your fuel pump. No dramas there at all. If you feel that you need more than one relay, or you're going to run more than one pump because you upgrade to a turbo setup, then obviously you can use this to trigger one of the relays, and then obviously you have some spares here if you want to do like a staged fuel pump system as well. All right, next up, number five is going to be your yellow with a red, and that's your check engine light. So in this case, it is connected to our dash, so we can obviously see that working as part of the testing over there. Now you also have an LED in your fuse box. That is also your check engine light, so you can have that active even if you don't connect any of the stuff to the dash. You can at least see from that there that your ECU is turned on, as well as obviously the blue LED on your ECU that will turn on as well when you give it ignition power. Next up, number six is going to be your yellow, and that is your tacho signal. So again, in this case, we've got it connected to our dash so we can actually see the tacho signal coming through there, and that you can obviously run to your rev counter over there. That is coming from the ECU, so you can control the level depending on whether you have a 4, 6 or 8 cylinder rev counter. You can completely control that from the ECU. Next up, we've got number seven. That's going to be a black with a red tracer. Now that's your ignition switch. So that's the thing that turns everything on. So again, if you're using a key barrel for that, please bear in mind, guys, that on key barrels, you have an accessory feed and an ignition feed. And what happens is when you flick to the start position, the accessory feed cuts out and the ignition feed stays on. So when you are looking for the ignition feed, just make sure that the 12 volts stays even when you go to the start position. If you go to the start position and the 12 volt goes away on the wire that you found, that's accessory, not ignition. Don't use that, because as you go to crank it, it's going to turn off the ECU and therefore it's never going to start. So just make sure of that. It does happen from time to time. Next up, we've got number 8, which is pink with a blue tracer. And that is for our alternator light, and you see we've got it hooked up to an LED over here so we can actually see when that comes on. Now in this particular case, the alternator light is also hooked up to the ECU. So again, you can add safeties in depending on that. So if the alternator light comes on, so it fails, you can get it to throw a check engine light as well as the LED. Also, you can maybe get it to, only rev to like 2000 RPM. So it notifies you there's a problem with that system. And then obviously you can go from there. Last up, number 9 is your yellow with the black tracer over there. We've got to connect our little box so it can transmit our oil pressure light on the dash there for us. Now that is going to be coming from the oil pressure switch. All right, so in this case, the customer has opted for the oil pressure switch. Now it not only goes to the fuse box to come out to there, but it also goes to the ECU as well. So again, you can set up a safety that if the oil light comes on, you can either kill the engine or reduce the RPM to say 500 or whatever you want to do as a built-in safety feature for that. Now, obviously the best way with oil pressure to do that is to obviously run an oil pressure sensor, so you can actually watch the oil pressure and you can have safeties built in based on RPM rather than just relying on when the light comes on, because usually when the light comes on, 9 out of 10 times it's kind of too late. If it comes on at 6,000 RPM and the oil pressure's dropped that low, you probably already damaged your engine from that particular situation. All right, okay, so that is the 9-pin plug. It's really, really straightforward. The only wires you really need to connect obviously is power, ignition, fuel pump, and then use your start signal from there. The rest of them are indication wires, so things like alternator light, oil light, rev counter signal, and obviously the temperature if you're going to use that as well. So really, really straightforward there, nothing too complicated. It does obviously state everything in here of exactly how you need to connect everything, so that's really, really nice and easy. Right, so moving on to these plugs over here. First, I'm going to go through what's connected, and I've also listed down whether or not it's available depending on what ECU you are using. So, starting off with the first one, that's your CAN plug over there. That is available for both the Storm and the X-Treme, so there's no dramas there whatsoever. Really, really straightforward. Pin 1 is 12 volts, 2 is ground, 3 is CAN high, 4 is CAN low. And that particular system works both for Haltech and for Link items as well. So it's already pre-pinned in the correct position, so you can plug it straight into any type of Link CAN unless they state otherwise. And also like the Haltech, for example, this, you can see it's just plugged straight in and it communicates no problem at all. Right, moving on to the analog now. Now this is where it gets a little bit different, because on the analog, we've got analog voltage 8, 9, 10, and 11, but only 8 is available on the Storm. So analog voltage 9, 10, and 11 is only available on the X-Treme ECU. But that is noted down here. It says Storm and X-Treme for analog voltage 8, and then X-Treme only for 9, 10, and 11. So again, really straightforward, nothing to worry about, but it is all documented for you there. Moving on to the digital 4-pin connector. So that's this one over here. It should be over here. Not the pedal, not the analog. There it is, digital. So you can see it's all labeled there. Right, so that has digital 5, 6, 7, and 8. So digital input 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now that is available on both the Storm and the X-Treme. So that is absolutely fine. That plugs works no matter what ECU you take. Then moving on to auxiliary, which is your little 3-pin plug over here. Now this one is a little bit different, and the reason I say that is because in actual fact auxiliary, which has auxiliary 6, 7, and 8, actually goes to 2 places. Number one, it goes to this plug over here, the 3-pin plug that I was just showing you there, but it also goes to the throttle plug. Why? Because we need to use auxiliary 5, 6, 7, and 8 if you are using a 6-wire stepper motor. So as an example, for this harness as it stands with the X-Treme, auxiliary plug is of no use because we're already using auxiliary 6, 7, and 8 for the 6-wire stepper motor. All right. If the customer changed to a drive-by-wire throttle, what we would then do is swap the plug out, because then we would have all the drive-by-wire, the 6 going there. So in other words, the 2 TPS signals, the 2 wires for the drive-by-wire motor, they would all be coming out of here and going to there. And then what happens is then you free up auxiliary 6, 7, and 8. All right, so that's the reason I've done that plug, is basically because I didn't want you guys to lose those auxiliaries in the event that you changed over to drive-by-wire. So nice and simple. If you're using the 6-wire stepper motor and the normal throttle body with a TPS, or any throttle body that just requires a TPS signal, then that auxiliary plug is not going to be any use because it is already used up by the 6-wire stepper motor. Okay. If you decide to change this one for a, let's say, just a single wire solenoid, then obviously we'd use auxiliary 5 for that. Then technically speaking, we could open up auxiliary 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so again, the way these are designed is customizable. That's what we had in mind, so you guys can chop and change things as you want, and we try not to limit you as best we can. Okay, so that's the auxiliary one. It's a little bit of a weird plug, but hopefully that explanation explains exactly how that works. And then lastly, we've got pedal position, or APP, accelerator pedal position. Now, it's only a pedal if you have the X-Treme and you're using drive-by-wire. But as I stated earlier, if you're not using that, then in actual fact, that's going to open analog input 3 and 4. It also has a 5 volts and a signal ground on there as well. Okay, so you can use it for a pedal if you have drive-by-wire. If you don't have drive-by-wire, like in this particular setup, that plug is actually completely open. The customer is more than happy to use those 2 analog inputs for whatever they wanted. In the event that something did change and they wanted to go back to drive-by-wire, if they did use those for something else, then they would have to move. Now you do have obviously analog voltage 8 open to you if you have a Storm. If you obviously having a Storm, you're not going to be able to go drive-by-wire, so you'd have analog 3 and 4 for there, and you'd have analog voltage 8 there. Obviously you wouldn't have 9, 10, and 11, so you'd have a total of 3 available analog inputs. Obviously the best idea would be to start with number 8 and then move on to 3 and 4 if you had to, because obviously in the event that you wanted to upgrade, you could actually sell your Storm ECU, buy an X-Treme, plug it straight in, and then boom, all of a sudden everything becomes available to you. Okay, Just to give you an example of the type of things that are obviously not connected on the Storm, as I said earlier, you'll see here we've got oil temp is temp 3 and fuel temp is temp 4. But clearly on this side, pin number 7 is not connected, which would be temp 4. So if you are using a Storm, you've got your 4-pin fuel plug over there, but in actual fact, you would only be able to put a fuel pressure sensor on and not a fuel pressure and temp, or fuel pressure and a fuel temp sensor as well. The rest of them are mainly in regards to things that we have allocated to the auxiliary plugs. Like I said, things like the analog 9, 10 and 11, etc. Okay, and obviously the drive-by-wire motor stuff is not in there as well. Okay, so hopefully that has been helpful for you guys when you're doing that. We do document everything because obviously you need to know exactly what's going on. But again, we have designed this particular harness because we had queries for it, and obviously some guys, especially with the non-VVTi, they don't particularly want to lay out the cache for an extreme. They may want to start off on a Storm, but obviously we don't want to limit you guys, and then you could eventually at a later date go buy yourself a Bosch drive-by-wire throttle, an accelerator pedal, and a Link X-Treme, and you can just plug it all straight into this harness and you wouldn't need to change a single thing. Okay, right, so that's the idea behind this. But yeah, so that is how that works. What we're going to do now basically is I'm going to get the engine all warmed up so we can see the temperature coming through on the dash there. Once I've done that, we'll come back and then we're going to carry on with the testing. So let me do that now and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so now we're back and we're going to be doing the actual testing of the harness. Now with these aftermarket ECUs, we don't really have as an extensive testing list as we do with the standard management ones. There's not really that much to test that doesn't take a reasonably quick amount of time. But what I have done is I've got an entire playlist of Link videos for you guys, everything from setting up inputs and outputs, checking your bass timing, how to load the bass map in, and I've just done the ones for how to test your inputs and your outputs. So obviously what I will do is I will just refer you over to that video over there. What we're going to be doing in terms of testing today, again, as I said, it's quite cut down, but what we're going to do is we're going to put the ignition on. Once we've done that, we're going to check that the check engine light, the oil pressure light, and the alternator light work. So again, we're looking for the LED to come on the fuse box. We're looking for the check engine light to come bright on the dash. We're looking for the oil light down there, and we're looking for the LED over there to light up. Now, as I already said, we are actually feeding the alternator light and the oil light to the ECU. So what I have done, and I'm just going to move the screen around over here so it can be a bit closer while we're busy. But basically, if you have a look over there, you'll see that I've got the start position. So that's what we'll see when we touch the black with the yellow wire with 12 volts. The starter control, what sort of situation is it in? The oil pressure switch and the alternator light. So as soon as I put the ignition on, these two bottom ones will light up green, saying that they are on. And then as soon as I touch the black with the yellow wire, the start position will go to active, and you'll see the starter control down. But it'll be very difficult to see with the camera on here, but hopefully you'll be able to catch it in the corner of the video over there and exactly what's happening. All right, and then once we've done that, in terms of actually running the engine, we're looking for the starter to work. So I want to make sure the starter system does work. I have put a link up earlier on how we control the starter relay via the ECU, so you can watch that if you haven't already. Then the fuel pump, so what we'll do is as soon as you put the ignition on, you're actually going to hear the fuel pump prime because that's how we've set up the system on the ECU. Obviously, we're looking for the fact that the engine will start and continue to run, as we know that the ECU is controlling the fuel pump and it's actually hooked up to the customer plug there, so we know everything is working exactly as it should. Then what we're going to do is we're going to come over to the TAC over here and take a look and make sure that we're getting a signal through on our yellow wire to make sure that's all connected correctly. Then what we'll do is we'll go over to the coolant temp sensor and take a look there, and you'll see that that is actually having a reading, and it'll go up, and that tells us that our yellow with the green wire is connected correctly as we expect it to. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run on the engine as per usual. I'm going to pull out each injector one by one just so you can hear each cylinder misfiring, and that tells us that every single cylinder is firing exactly as it should. As it is either Storm or Extreme, it is fully sequential in injection and ignition. So obviously it's going to misfire on every time that I go, and we know that that's working correctly. All right, so that's pretty much all the testing that we are going to do. In terms of the alternator light, what I'll probably do is pop over here as well so you can actually see it lit up on the ECU as well. So to put the ignition on, nice and simple, we're just going to take our black with the red tracer wire and we're going to give it 12 volts. And as I do that, you're going to hear all the relays click. You can see now the oil light has come on, our check engine light, hang on, there you go. Check engine light is on. Check engine light is on the fuse box. Oil light has come on, so we know that that's working over there. And what we're going to do is now move over to the computer here, and as you can see there, exactly as I said, so the two bottom ones have gone green, so that's your oil pressure switch and your alternator light, so they are now active. All right, we've got all the live data obviously through from the ECU, so we're happy with that. Right, so the next thing we're going to do obviously is we're going to go into starting the engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on my ear defenders now, so that is obviously going to protect my ears, because it is very loud. We've got no exhaust on here, just the straight manifolds over there. So as I said, the ECU itself is controlling the starter motor. So all I'm going to do is literally touch this wire to 12 volts, let it go, and it'll take over from there. So 1, 2, 3. There you go. So super happy with that. She's fired up. We've got fuel pressure in there, so super happy with that. You can see we've got engine RPM there. You can see that the engine is running. You can see that the check engine light, the oil light, and the alternator light have gone out, so we're happy with that. We've got ourselves a tack signal coming through over there now, so that is all gravy. Looking over at the coolant temp, you can see that that has gone up as well, so super happy with that. Now let's go over and start doing all the injectors. So number 7, number 5, number 3, number 1. Over to the other side. Number 8. That's number 6. Yeah. That is number 4. And that is number 2. Alrighty. Ignition system there. Alright, fantastic. Alright, so we've done the testing. Obviously, we're quite happy that the whole system is working exactly as it should. She runs really nicely. We know all of the injectors and coils are firing as they should. Everything in terms of the information there is happy. Again, I'll refer you guys back to the link that I put earlier if you want to test your inputs and your outputs. I do always recommend that even when we send the harness out and we do put a base map on it. Obviously, I do check all of that information, but the word of it is trust but verify. So again, don't just assume that everything is correct. Always check, and it literally takes you 20 to 30 minutes to test all the inputs and the outputs just to make sure that you're super happy with it. Always remember, you need to have your ECU pinout when you're doing that, because obviously you need to know exactly what is where, and then you can test all of those in one go. All right. So as per usual with these particular ones, you can see she does run absolutely fine in this particular case, but every time, and I do put it in the welcome pack, always check the base timing. You don't want to end up not checking the base timing, it being slightly out. You send it off for a tune and everything is then incorrect if someone comes along and corrects it later on. So nice and simple, get the harness on, check all the inputs and outputs, check the base timing, get it to fire up, get it up to temperature, make sure you haven't got any leaks. Because always remember, if you end up at a dyno and your engine starts to spring an oil leak or a water leak or something along those lines, you're still paying for that dyno time. All right, so do make sure that everything is 100% before you go off. You guys can call us if you need to help you to get started. We'll help as best we can, obviously being remotely in some of these cases. But yeah, we can usually get you started over the phone, and if you've got access to, I use Chrome Remote Desktop rather than TeamViewer, but yeah, we can jump on the PC and we can check everything with you if required. But everything is labeled down there, so it should be relatively straightforward along with our videos to help you guys get started. But thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you do have any questions, as per usual, you can comment down below. You can also get us on our Facebook page at Phoenix Engine Management, and obviously we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But again, thanks for watching, guys, and we will see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, let the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win at life. I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, put your hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light. Ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took the red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to